Now, Cayce, in contrast, believed that it was his subconscious mind exploring the dream realm, where he believed the minds were timelessly connected. All minds of all people, in fact. Cayce founded a nonprofit organization called the Association for Research and Enlightenment to store and facilitate the study of his channelings, as well as running a hospital. A biographer gave him the nickname of the Sleeping Prophet. Now, some consider him the true founder and a principal source of the most characteristic beliefs of the New Age movements. Now, what follows is Cayce's biography. Again, born in 1877, as a child, he was alleged to have seen his deceased grandfather. Now, he regarded what he saw as a ghost-like apparition because he could see through it if he looked hard enough. Young Cayce found it difficult to keep his mind on his lessons at school. He was taken to church when he was 10 and was introduced to the Bible, and by the time he was 12, he had read the Bible a dozen times. Now, back in May of 1889, while reading the Bible in the woods, he saw a woman with wings who told him that his prayers were answered and asked him what he wanted most of all. He said most of all he wanted to help others, especially sick children. He decided he'd like to be a missionary. Now, the next night, after receiving a complaint from his school teacher, his father, a difficult taskmaster, ruthlessly tested him for spelling, eventually knocking him out of his chair with exasperation because Cayce couldn't do the lesson. Pardon my cough, please. I got some allergies here. But at that point, Cayce then heard a voice of the lady who had talked to him the night before. And she told him that if he could just sleep a little bit, that she would help him. So he begged his father, let me take a rest, and I promise I'll be better when I get up. His father let him. He took a little nap. When his father came back into the room and woke him up, he knew all the answers. In fact, he could repeat anything in the entire book. His father thought he'd been fooling before and knocked him out of his chair again. Now, eventually, Cayce memorized all his school books in that same way after falling asleep. He'd wake up and then, miraculously, just be able to recite the entire book. So Cayce obviously had a photographic memory. Now, by 1892, the teacher regarded Cayce as his best student. On being questioned, Cayce told the teacher that he saw pictures of the pages in the book. His father then became proud of his accomplishments and spread the word, resulting in Cayce becoming different from his peers. Now, shortly after this, Cayce exhibited an ability to diagnose illnesses in his sleep. He was struck on the base of the spine by a ball during school during a game, and he started acting strangely. He couldn't walk properly, so they put him to bed to rest. Now, he went to sleep, woke up, had a diagnosis for his cure. His family prepared the diagnosis, and he cured himself. His father then boasted that his son was the greatest fellow in the world when he was asleep. Now, in 1893, the Cayce family moved to Hopkinsville, Kentucky. During this time, Cayce received an 8th grade education. And then he also noted his clairvoyant abilities, left the family farm to pursue forms of employment. So let's do the math. By that time, he was 16? Yeah, 16 years old. Now, throughout his life, Cayce was drawn to church as a member of the Disciples of Christ. He read the entire Bible once a year. He attended church. He taught Sunday school, and he recruited missionaries. He's said to have been able to see auras around people. He said he spoke to angels. He said he heard voices of departed relatives. In his early years, he agonized over whether these prophetic abilities were spiritually delivered from God or from another source, perhaps demonic. Now, in 1900, Cayce formed a business partnership with his father to sell insurance. But in March of that year, he was struck by severe laryngitis, and that resulted in a complete loss of speech. Unable to work, he lived at home with his parents for almost a year. He then decided to take up the trade of photography, an occupation that would put less exertion on his voice. He began an apprenticeship in a studio in Hopkinsville and eventually became very good at the photography trade. The next year, in 1901, a traveling stage hypnotist and entertainer who referred to himself as the Laughing Man was performing at the Hopkinsville Opera House. He heard about Cayce's throat condition and offered to attempt a cure. Cayce accepted his offer, and the experiment was conducted in the office of Manning Brown, the local throat specialist in Hopkinsville. Cayce's voice allegedly returned while he was in a hypnotic trance, but disappeared when he woke up. Now, since the Laughing Man had appointments in other cities, he could not continue his hypnotic treatments of Cayce, but admitted that he had failed because Cayce would not go into the third stage of hypnosis because he couldn't take the hypnotic suggestion. Now, a New York hypnotist named John Quackenbush tried but found the same impediment. Couldn't get Cayce into that third stage of hypnosis. Now, there was only one local hypnotist, a guy named Al Lane. He offered to help Cayce restore his voice. Now, it worked. Cayce was then connected with other entities while in a trance. That's where it changed. Now, in subsequent sessions then, Cayce wanted to indicate the connection was made to the person or entity that was requesting the reading. And he would generally start off with, "We have the body." In other words, he was now connected to another entity. After 20 minutes, Cayce, still in a trance, declared the treatment over. Upon awakening, his voice was alleged to have remained normal. Lane then asked Cayce to describe Lane's own ailments and suggest cures, and reportedly found the results both accurate and effective. Lane regarded the ability as clairvoyance. Lane suggested that Cayce offer his trance healing to the public. Now, Cayce was reluctant because he had no idea what he was prescribing when he was asleep and whether his remedies were safe. He also told Lane he didn't want anything to know about the patient as it wasn't relevant. Now, Cayce finally agreed on the conditions that the readings would be free. He began, with Lane's help, to offer free treatments to the townspeople. Lane described Cayce's method as a self-imposed hypnotic trance, which induces clairvoyance. Reports of Cayce's work appeared in the newspapers, which inspired many inquiries. Cayce stated he could work just as effectively using a letter from the individual as with the person being present in the room. So, given only the person's name and location, Cayce said he could diagnose the physical and mental conditions of what he termed as the entity or the subject. And then he provided a remedy or cure. Cayce was still hesitant and worried, as one dead patient was all he needed to become a murderer. His fiancée, Gertrude Evans, agreed with Cayce. Now, there was a common belief at the time that subjects of hypnosis eventually went insane, or at least their health would suffer. Now, Cayce soon became famous, and people from around the world sought his advice through correspondence. By 1902, he got a bookshop job in the town of Bowling Green, where he boarded with some young professionals, two of which were doctors. Because remember, Cayce was not accepting money for his readings. He lost his voice there, and Lane came to help effect the normal cure again, and he would come every week, and finally cured Cayce. Cayce, still worried, kept all these meetings secret and continued to refuse money for his readings. Now, Cayce and Gertrude married in 1903, and she moved to Bowling Green with him. They had 3 children. Gertrude still disapproved of the readings, and Cayce still agonized over the morality of them. A few days later, Cayce revealed the activity to the professionals at the boarding house, the doctors, one of whom was a magistrate and a journalist, after which the medical authorities forced Lane to close his practice. He left to acquire an osteopathic qualification in Franklin. Cayce and Gertrude accepted the resulting publicity as best they could, greatly aided by the diplomacy of the young doctors. So now Lane was now an osteopath, he was a doctor, and he could go back to helping Cayce. Cayce and a relative opened a photography studio in Bowling Green, because remember, he still wasn't accepting money for his readings. And the doctors then formed a committee with some colleagues to investigate the phenomenon, with Cayce's cooperation. All the experiments confirmed the accuracy of the readings. However, Cayce refused a lucrative offer to go into business. After a violent examination by doctors, while in a trance, Cayce refused any more investigations, declaring he would only do readings for those who needed help and believed in readings. So he wasn't interested in convincing the doctors of his gift. In 1906 and 1907, a fire burned down his photograph studios, and he became bankrupt. His sons were then born, but he needed money, and he refused to go into business with other people, including a homeopath from Hopkinsville named Wesley Ketchum. He then got a job at a photography studio, again in Hopkinsville. Now, Ketchum was persistent, and he spread information in various medical circles, and by 1910 he was written up in the press. When a reporter contacted Cayce, he explained to the reporter that somehow he had the ability to go into the intuitive sleep when he wanted to. And this was different from how he would sleep normally at nighttime like anybody else. Now, when asked the mechanism of his readings via the sleep method, they were told that it happened via the capacities of the subconscious mind. Ketchum again urged Cayce to join the business. Now, after soul-searching the whole night, Cayce finally accepted the offer under certain conditions, including that he didn't accept money for the readings. He was proselytizing. He didn't want to do it for money. Cayce read the back readings, but they contained so many technical terms that he gained no more understanding of what he was doing. So Cayce was still doing this, but he didn't understand what he was doing. Now, Edgar Cayce, and especially his wife Gertrude, still did not give therapeutic priority to the readings. Now, when Gertrude then became fatally ill with tuberculosis, they used Cayce's readings after the doctor had given up. Cayce then recommended a cure for his wife, and it worked. She was cured. Now, after this, by 1912, Cayce, whose everyday conscious mind was still not aware of these readings, discovered that Ketchum had not even been honest about these readings. And he used the finances that he received to gamble. In other words, Cayce didn't want to receive money. He wasn't receiving money, but Ketchum was receiving money and took this money and gambled. Cayce quit the company and immediately went back to being a photographer in Selma, Alabama. Cayce's work grew in volume and fame. Now soon he asked for voluntary donations to support himself and his family so that he could practice his readings full time. So now he's accepting money. He continued to work in an apparent trance state with a hypnotist all his life. His wife and eldest son soon replaced Lane in this role. Lane was the hypnotist. And a secretary, Gladys Davis, then recorded all of Cayce's readings in shorthand. The growing fame of Cayce, along with the popularity he received from newspapers, attracted several eager, commercially minded men who wanted to seek a fortune using clairvoyant abilities. Even though Cayce was reluctant to help them, he was persuaded to give his readings, which left him dissatisfied with himself and unsuccessful. A cotton merchant offered to give him $100 a day to read the cotton market. Cayce refused the offer. Treasure hunters wanted to come. Horse racing fans wanted him to predict the future. Cayce refused. Now, finally, in 1923, Arthur Lammers, who was a wealthy printer and student of metaphysics, persuaded Cayce to give readings on philosophical subjects. Cayce was told by Lammers that, in his trance state, he spoke of Lammers' past lives and of reincarnation, something that Lammers believed in. Now, reincarnation was the popular subject of the day, but again, not accepted as part of the Christian doctrine. Cayce still considered himself a Christian. He challenged Lammers' charge that he validated astrology and reincarnation in the readings. In fact, Cayce said, "I couldn't have said all that." And Lammers says, "Yeah, but you did." And Cayce's stenographer, Gladys Davis, again recorded the following. And I quote, "In this we see the plan of development of those individuals set upon the plane, meaning the ability to enter again into the presence of the Creator and become a full part of creation." This convinced Cayce. He was now quite unconvinced. They had been referring to the article of reincarnation. The best Lammers could do is that the reading opens up doors and shares certain beliefs. Lammers had come to him with quite a bit of information on his own state, with Cayce seeming intent upon convincing that Cayce now felt the readings had strong held beliefs. 12 years later,